Over half of the firm have attended a digital academy with more than 600 ideas generated.
Digital Labs is now our go-to place for sharing automations and data solutions across the board. Since our launch in March, we have had over 250 solutions contributed and close to 4,000 solutions downloaded. Better yet, as a firm, we have actually automated 34,000 hours.
So in terms of momentum, from sitting in a digital academy in October of last year to where we are today, the progress has been absolutely phenomenal. Our language has changed around how we're solving problems for our clients, and really we're bringing different ideas every day. I love the excitement that I see across the team and the challenge that's bringing.
As part of a wider strategy in finance transformation, we're engaged to solve a problem that the client had been struggling with for years. In the past, they've used a very traditional approach, primarily through pivot tables and other non-repeatable tools. As a result, their analysis has been inefficient and quickly outdated. I built a model using Power BI that automates the cleansing and modelling of the data, whilst also presenting it in a really dynamic and insightful way. This means everyone in the business, from the CFO to business partners, can drill into insights that are relevant to them and their teams, rather than just being presented with a bunch of numbers.
We actually had a client that was subject to a GST review, and the ATO requested that they provide transactional AR data across a certain period of time. And unfortunately for us, the client only had their AR data in the form of receipt printouts. So we designed and built from scratch an automated workflow solution that would transform their data, and basically we split up and identified the individual sales receipts from their gigantic text file and captured the key pieces of data in each. The workflow then essentially reconstructed and restructured each sales receipt from scratch as a single record of data in Excel before bringing them back into a single flat file ready to be used for data testing.
I think our massive opportunity this year is having a culture of thinking about digitising. So looking at every one of our engagements and the activities and the outcomes and asking ourselves the questions, well, what can I digitise in that? What would it take for me to digitise those two steps, whether it be a current state assessment or some kind of diagnostic? How do I digitise that so I can drive more value to my client, whether it be through time savings or through actually we can spend more time looking at the insights. So yeah, I'm really excited. I feel like we've only just started on this.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you to PwC for the video, which explained how they're looking at digitisation. And this is an opportunity for us as their clients to explore in more detail how we're doing it. My name is Andrew Porter. I'm a director of the G100 and CFO of the Australian Foundation Investment Company, a listed institutional funds manager, which is a shareholder, I imagine, in many of the companies in which you work. I would like to start today by recognising the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose ancestral lands and waters we work and live on throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We at AFIC have seen how the role of the finance team has changed over the years, not only here, but also in the companies in which we invest. One of the changes this year has been having the entire team working remotely for an extended period of time, which shows, I think, how adaptability and the need to respond quickly to black swan events are an important skill set for today's finance team, as, of course, is the need for a responsive and quick-thinking IT team. One of the key benefits that the G100 provides is the knowledge sharing, understanding, and learning how others' finance teams are changing, responding to new challenges, new methods, and new demands, while still performing the key accounting, financial reporting, and financial management roles, amongst others. This is the start of a series of programs that is only one element of how the G100 and its members will be looking at the future of the finance team, what has changed, what skills will be needed, and why. So look out for more details in the coming months. Our thanks to all of the 4 major accounting firms for arranging and performing the initial interviews that we used to form the basis of this program. Our specific thanks to PwC for arranging these initial sessions, of which, as I said, this is the first. They have done a marvellous job in assembling some people with, I think, extremely relevant insight into what has changed and what will be required, and for what I think will be a fascinating session. I am therefore delighted to hand over to Sam Lobley, a partner at PwC and lead of the CFO advisory practice, PwC Australia. Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for that kind introduction. As Andrew mentioned, my name is Sam Lobley. I'm a partner here at PwC and have the pleasure of leading our CFO advisory practice. So that video you just saw showed a great example of some of the tangible outcomes that can be achieved through some fairly focused digitisation. What was really pleasing to me was that those people that you saw on the video, most of them were part of my team, and all of the problems that we were looking to solve were real, relevant client issues. So with over 20 years of working with finance functions, I'm really, really excited to be working alongside the G100 on this important topic. What is the future of our profession, and how can we make sure that this profession is one that we all want to be part of for many years into the future? So why are we doing this now? The role of finance and the role of CFOs has never been more important. Events of the past 12 months have illustrated very clearly that everything can get turned upside down in the blink of an eye, and traditional growth assumptions can be thrown out of the window. Successful organizations need a successful finance function that can help them look forward with confidence, be prepared to deal with uncertainty, but not be put off guard by it. All the while, a finance function that needs to lead on governance, help sift through large amounts of unstructured data, and provide an inspiring place to work. All in all, doing all that in a cost-effective manner. The challenges of COVID have shown that society can really take a quantum leap forward in the way it thinks about digital tools and ways of working. So now really is the time for us to take that learning into the finance teams that we work with day in, day out. Make the most of these tools. Most of them are well understood. They work. Really, the key is making them fit for your business. And so the second point is thinking through what are the best ways of working in the new normal that we're all facing. And all the while thinking through the capability gaps that exist in our current teams, thinking about the training and development needs in our teams today, tomorrow, and in future years. So as Andrew mentioned, the purpose of these sessions is to work alongside G100, alongside you as members and participants in the community, to take deep dives into the topics that matter most. Today we're going to focus on digitisation, and the future webinars will focus on those topics that you believe are most relevant. So working alongside the working group that we've pulled together, we're keen for any and all ideas that you may have around the topics that you'd be interested to hear on and who from. So please do reach out to either myself or any one of the G100 members if you've got any suggestions for future events. So for today, we've got two experts in the field. Vishy Narayanan, who is the PwC Chief Digital Officer, and Lisa Fraser, who's the head of the Fusion program at Macquarie. Both Vishy and Lisa will provide a presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then at the end of the session we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So feel free to add any questions that you have in the free text box throughout the session, and I'll run the Q&A with Vishy and Lisa towards the end. So first up, I'd like to introduce our speakers. As I mentioned, Vishy is a partner at PwC and is our Chief Digital and Information Officer. Prior to that, he was the head of global technology at Cochlear. His role at PwC is to drive digital change, embed digital ways of working, and support the digital mindset across the whole of the firm, from the oldest, most experienced partner to the newest graduate. Vishy is a regular speaker at conferences covering a range of topics from digital transformation, customer engagement, and managing complex digital projects. Outside work, Vishy is based in Sydney with his wife and two children, and he's a keen tech and sports enthusiast. We're also really proud to be joined today by Lisa Fraser, who I mentioned is the head of the Fusion project at Macquarie, which is their general ledger implementation project. Given the size and scale of Macquarie, I imagine that is not an insubstantial task. Prior to taking on that role, Lisa was the head of finance at Macquarie and had over 1,000 finance professionals working for her. And I understand, Lisa, that this week you're celebrating your 27th year with Macquarie, so congratulations on that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Vishy, who will take us through to the next part of the session.
Thank you for that introduction, Sam, and wonderful to be with you all and share our perspectives. What could be a better time than now? We've come through the last 6 months of some of the most challenging, not just economic, but environmental conditions. And here we are at the end of that, looking for not only recovery, but growth. And the topic of digital comes up in every conversation. So why am I here to share PwC's journey and stories with you? Think about PwC, the term, the brand. We think about the heritage with quality, with audit, with tax, consulting. How do we take a 150-year-old heritage and actually get the advantages of a digital incumbent and be more of an agile organization? That was the challenge put to our leadership teams over the last 2 to 3 years. And one of the areas that we also wanted to focus on is speaking from a position of experience, not just knowledge. I call it the digital authenticity gap. Sometimes professional services firms are guilty of telling a lot of clients what to do, but not doing it ourselves. And that's the challenge that we set ourselves through our digital transformation journey. I also want to be clear that what I'm sharing with you now is certainly not mission accomplished. So I'm not unfurling any flags or any banners or calling any elections early. I'm just trying to make sure that we share our results as they stand now, and we will continue to adapt and share more lessons as they come. And this will not be possible without two key ingredients: our people and you, our clients. And that is really fundamental to how we've been transforming PwC, not just locally, but across the global network. We're walking the talk, as I said, and we're now starting to take a lot of this lessons learned and offering these solutions in the marketplace. So if I can go to the first slide. So why invest in digital upskilling? So profit and purpose go hand in hand. And I'm speaking to a group of finance leaders, and you know this better than most. Upskilling is not just about technology. It's really about bringing our people into this. And our job as leaders is to sell this vision to our people. There's a lot of stats. We've all seen the doom and gloom out there. We've seen that automation is going to result in people losing jobs. There's an element of truth to that, but I also believe that automation replaces tasks, not people. And if we can continue to focus on upskilling our people and give them the skills to be contemporary in the future, then they continue to do more value-adding work. And that's the premise on which PwC's digital transformation journey is predicated. So if I can go to the next slide, and I'll share the context on how we've built our digital transformation journey. We simply call it learn, work, and share. Learn. Learn has some key components. We actually kicked off with a tool called the Digital Fitness Assessment. This is a tool that's freely available on the app stores, whether it's an Apple or Google Play stores. Please download it, and it's free to use, and you can actually play with it. It tests 4 things. It tests your skill sets, your mindsets, your behaviors, and your relationships through digital. It gives you a score, and at PwC, we love scores and we love leaderboards. And that really started a change journey where partners that have been in the firm for many years, who are traditionally the experts at their field and absolute subject matter experts, when it came to digital, their scores didn't quite add up. They looked at their scores and they went, I've got a grad that's just come in the last year or two, and they've got a higher score than me in digital fitness. How can that be possible? And they really started this journey out of curiosity and also a little bit of discomfort, which is a good thing when you're trying to transform an organization. But what happened next, I could not have predicted. Our partners embraced this. We had over 95% of our partners completed and actually self-declare their scores and say, this is where my score is, not good enough, and I need to do something better. So that started, I believe, one of the key ingredients for our digital transformation journey. The next step is digital academies. So we were offering this physical in-room academies, which when COVID hit, we had to transform to 100% digital. We now call this Virtual Digital Academy, and it's offered not only for us internally within PwC, but we're also offering it to our clients. It focuses on 4 key areas. It looks at data, it looks at automation, it looks at all the compliance aspects of data, and storytelling, visualization, etc. And it looks at tools like machine learning and innovation. So how do we look at not just learning about these topics in theory, but do the deep dive and actually apply it to our everyday work? So that's digital academies. We also then ran another part of a program called Digital Accelerators, which is 2% of our workforce were pulled from their day jobs, given intense training over 3 months in topics of AI and machine learning, data wrangling, and also areas of actual compliance and security areas. We then brought them back, put them into their lines of service, and their job was to disrupt and digitize the work, the way they did their work. So those 3 components, the digital fitness is, think of it as a school leaver certificate, digital academies as an undergrad program, and digital accelerators as our PhD equivalent. Learning on its own was not going to drive the digital transformation. We had to apply the learning. And that's where we created a safe data platform called the Workbench, where we give people access to, so we use, for example, Alteryx, Power BI, Tableau, UiPath as the 4 tools. Obviously, Excel is here and it's here to stay. We also use a few other machine learning tools. And the data platform has elements where people can go and apply their learning. There's a lot of research that says that, especially more the technical aspects of learning, if you don't apply it within 2 weeks after your learning is completed, you forget it. So we also make sure that we track people through their learning journey, and we create this concept of a landing zone where they complete their learning, land in a cohort of 30 to 50 people, and they collaborate together on client engagements and their work that makes it real for them. Learn and work has been great, but the secret sauce that's really turbocharged our digital transformation is what we call the digital lab. You heard Annie and others talk about it in the video, and it's a fast-moving platform. So think of it as a marketplace for innovation. And that's how we use it within PwC, and not just in Australia, but across the Asia-Pac region and globally. So let me give you a real example. Let's think about a grad sitting in Adelaide that's come up with a fantastic automation or a concept. If he or she creates that, historically, their teams of 3 or 4 would have benefited from it. They've now created it, and they put it into this infrastructure called Digital Lab, and it scales. So the better the asset, the more people that view it and download it and use it, and you get rewarded as an individual for contributing to it and also consuming from it. So we reward both contribution and consumption on the platform. And that has changed our adoption, but just the mindset of our teams and our partners. Our partners now see Digital Lab, data platform, and the other tools as part of their business tools, not just something sitting on the side. And the other key ingredient here is this was not done centrally. This was done through a citizen-led program. That's how we refer to it. So we have a central team that's responsible for providing the tools and the compliance and the security, but most of this is done out in the business and where our client needs are. So these are the 3 components that really make up our digital transformation journey. But if I just highlight, I guess from our perspective, it's not just done from a top down. As I said, our partners are now reaching out to a lot of our staff for reverse mentoring. How do I become a digital expert? Sam talked about a lot of the people on the video are in his team. I'll give you an example. One of our clients a few months ago sent me an email, which is awesome to see. They said, typically we talk to a lot of our partners about this topic. We had one of your digital accelerators come in and have an engagement with us. We call him DigiBen. And they want to create 20 DigiBens within their environment because he's just done some fairly amazing things that they've struggled with over the last few years. So those kind of stories I never get tired of hearing, but we're not done yet. We're just starting as the video said. So if I can just go to the next slide, I'll share some early business benefits. So we've had about 25,000 people across the region download and use digital fitness assessment within the PwC network. We've had thousands of clients doing it. And as I said, it's free to use, and we'll send you some information after the call. We've now have about 400 assets sitting in the digital lab. Assets are a set of tools either through Power BI or Alteryx or Tableau, like I mentioned, UiPath, that people can download. And the repetitive, the low value, high volume tasks that people do, they now download and do it through this tool rather than doing the same manual process over and over again. We've had about 7,000 downloads and reuse of these tools, which is awesome to see. And that's the stat that I keep a really close eye on. It's not just the unique number of assets, but the number of times they're downloaded and used. We've saved about 50,000 hours of estimated effort of repetitive tasks, and that's growing on a daily basis. Over 70% of our people have attended digital academies. But there's two stats I really want to share that are not on that page. The number one for me is our people experience. 18 months ago, we ran a survey across our workforce, and we asked them a simple question. How confident do you feel about the tools and technologies that are at your disposal? And how curious are you to embrace and implement them on your client? The score 18 months ago was in the low 70s. Still a pretty good number. We ran that again 2 months ago, and we hit 90% in that score. That is an amazing stat, because what it tells us is, yes, COVID has really contributed to that, because people are working remotely, adopting new ways of working, putting themselves through the pain barriers of learning new things. But equally, it shows that our people are now confident, and they know that these tools are things they can apply in their context, not just, it's not a word processing program. It's a set of tools that they can assemble and do things that are specific to them. I call that democratizing technology and democratizing data. And that's a key challenge that I know a lot of you are facing in your organizations, because we spend a lot of money in capital technology. We also spend quite a bit of money in licensing, etc. How do we make that work for our organization? That's a challenge that we are tracking. And as I said, the digital academies are now 100% virtual, which means we can offer it not just internally, but to partners and clients such as yourself. So that's a quick summary of how we've gone through our journey. I just want to share a quick set of lessons learned so far. As I said, this is by no means, we're by no means an authority, sole authority on this topic. We've run it. As I said, we've actually been running it for the last 18 months. There's a lot of great lessons learned. Number one, be clear about the objectives of your digital upskilling program. It should not be seen as a push, it should be a pull. And different businesses and different business units have different needs. So it needs to be customizable so people feel that they can pull it, and the what's in it for me, it's clear. The importance of leadership. So it's not just about embracing it, but it's living it and showing that you are happy to get your hands dirty and get in and use these tools. And a lot of these are actually a lot easier to use than some of the legacy tool sets. The importance of top-down, bottom-up, sideways, and collaboration in driving digital transformation. It's not just going to work top-down. It's not just going to work from a citizen-led bottom-up approach. It needs to flow through the organization and also reach out to partners outside the organization or other teams to contribute to that, to your transformation. The other thing we learned is to be really mindful of cloud and the licensing of tools. I call it Hotel California. It's very easy to get in. Sometimes it's hard to leave because it can be a very expensive process. So you need to manage that carefully. Share the early quick wins and make sure that you build on that momentum. You will have some early adopters. Our equivalent of accelerators are sitting in your organizations. How can you tap into them and get them to scale and drive digitization at scale? I'll finish this part of the discussion with a quote from a CEO that I look up to and admire a lot, Satya Nadella from Microsoft. 2 weeks ago, he shared his perspectives on leadership, and he said, for him, leadership is really about driving clarity, consistency, energy, and a sense of confidence under a constrained environment. It's true under most circumstances. Never has it been truer compared to the environment we live in today. So thank you for the opportunity to share our lessons learned. I'm also really keen to hear from Lisa and answer any questions you might have. So thanks. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Vishy. Thank you for that. I must say, as a recipient of the digital fitness app, I was definitely part of the competitive landscape, you might say, amongst the PwC Australia partners. And the score that you had and how you were developing that score became a topic of conversation at almost all partner meetings. So well done to you on that. I'd also reflect on the fact that this is designed to be inclusive. So there are clearly going to be members of the team who are further up the curve in terms of elements of this digitisation. But one thing I've learned from the journey we've gone through at PwC is by taking a smallish amount of time to understand what the tools are, what their capabilities are, then all of us can have a relevant leadership role and participate in an impactful way in these conversations. Whereas if you don't get on board, then pretty quickly, you become left behind. So just changing tack slightly, we'll hand over to Lisa Fraser. So Lisa, maybe I could ask you to provide a summary of Macquarie's journey and an overview of the path taken.
Sure. So I'll talk to the finance journey more than anything here today. Macquarie is obviously a very large organisation, and my part of that has been within the finance function. And that started in my role as the head of finance. And one of the things that helped enable our transformation was that about 10 years ago, we actually started bringing like activities together. And I think that was the beginning of our journey, where we had teams who were doing all disparate things around the world, but we tried to bring things together into teams where they were doing those activities, and then they could actually look at how they were doing them, take the best way, adapt that way, and obviously have regional adaptations for it, but actually try and get things done in a similar way. And we did that across some of our teams, like our fund accounting teams, our accounts payable teams, our teams that prepared financial statements, just a number of teams that were doing similar things, but they were doing them in different places around the world. We then, over the years, kept progressing that and bringing more activities together that were similar, and that might have included some of our tax accounting and also our financial control as well, our debits and credits. Then, with that base, we then started a journey of automation, and we actually had an academy, we called it, where we brought people together to actually look at, bring their problem statement of some of their activities that they were doing, and we joined them with some teams that we set up that had the technology skills. So they understood how to use Alteryx, they understood how to use Power BI or robotics. And we looked at what the teams were trying to do, and we looked at how we could use automation to do it for them. And so that was definitely a partnership where we brought people in from the external world who had those skills. Some of it we did in India, which for us was a good place to do it because there were so many people that had those types of skills. But we used Big Four firms as well to really supplement the skills that we had within our teams at Macquarie and combine them with our finance skills. So that really, I think, saw a good opportunity for our teams to really see how automation could actually make their life a lot easier than what it had been when they were wrangling a whole lot of information themselves. And through that, I think as well, what they could see was what was possible. And we have used Power BI significantly in our teams to really give us a lot more analytical ability and also reduce the amount of analytics that we have to do, because it is much easier for people to drill down and look at the information that they want to see within a similar data set. So that has been something that our teams have really embraced and they've learnt. And in terms of training them and upskilling them, we've trained people, we've brought in specialists to work with them, but a lot of our people actually is a lot that they can learn on YouTube. So they supplemented their training courses that they did with us with actually what they could actually go and look at themselves as well as they learn how to use these different tools. And they actually found that quite an effective way of actually helping themselves grow and helping themselves educate as well. So one thing that we did find, and the teams found as they used those tools, though, is that it was still very important to have some kind of governance on it. I think we all know that macros and Excel you have to be very careful that you don't create a whole lot of bespoke activities that actually aren't being governed appropriately. And particularly tools like Alteryx are very, very powerful, but you can actually create a whole lot of effort that is achieves quite a lot, but actually might not have the appropriate compliance and governance around it. So we actually developed some standards, some governance standards with how we would actually develop any of the activities that we're putting into Alteryx and Power BI, what the rules were around the development of those, the sign off of them, and then the ongoing running of them as well, and where they had to be maintained within our technology servers and things as well. So we certainly added a governance bend to that activity as well. And it's certainly, those tools have become very, very popular amongst our teams. But I still think in some ways a lot of those items, particularly around Alteryx, it's still quite tactical automation is what I would say. Now that we, about 3 years ago, we decided we had to replace our general ledger. And as you can all imagine, replacing the general ledger for Macquarie is quite significant. We actually realised when we looked around the world that not many banks, and particularly global banks, were actually on one general ledger. And so we were first having to go live pretty much all at once for a new general ledger around the world. Most people seem to use it in either regions or down business lines, not just simply globally the way we were. When we looked at our options, it really came down to really just something like Oracle Fusion on the cloud, SAP, or upgrading PeopleSoft. Really, realistically, they were our three options. For us, we chose Oracle Fusion. I think that was partly possibly also because our heritage was in PeopleSoft and our data model was going to adapt quicker to Oracle Fusion than, say, SAP. And so that we thought that would make our journey slightly easier. So we are well into that journey now. We actually went live with the accounts receivable and accounts payable version modules of that, and fixed assets while we're all working from home globally around the world. So I think 36 countries accounts payable went live over a single weekend, and it's been seamless that whole time. So it's been very, very successful. Some of our businesses didn't actually have accounts receivable modules. They actually don't necessarily bill a huge amount of clients, and so we went live for the first time with them on the accounts receivable module. And as part of that, we actually redesign end-to-end the whole process around that. And I think that end-to-end redesign really showed me that although our teams have done lots of good tactical automation in their silo that they might look after, or their piece of a process, actually the real benefits for an organisation is really when you can bring that whole end-to-end redesign together, and you do it with the business, you do it with the finance team, and you do it with technology. Really decide how you want the data to plumb through the organisation, and really think from very much from the drawing board of how you may want to redesign that, the governance that you want around it, and the further automation that you might actually get from that process as well. The bits of automation, although they had been great in the past because they brought structure to processes that were otherwise bespoke and manual, and then made that next layer of automation much easier, they were just pieces of automation that join together but not necessarily a whole. And I think our GL journey and some of the end-to-end process redesign we've done as part of that has really shown me the benefit of that end-to-end. So that is, we go live on our general ledger, hopefully sort of by mid next year. That has been a journey in itself. We had to get comfortable with cloud and what that meant. The benefits of cloud are obviously things like constant upgrades. Oracle has been fantastic in working with us in the product where it didn't quite fit what we needed. And certainly we've got a lot of work to do before we go live, but we're at a significant milestone where we've just finished all of our integration testing with our systems and making sure that the numbers that our systems would normally have received in the past, the outcomes that they would then deliver were achievable. And now we are in the process of basically just going now to user adoption and making sure our teams have adapted their processes and are trained and ready to go live on the new ledger early next year, sort of hopefully April, May next year after our year end. They're probably the key things. I mean, I have, I think Sam said, I've been at Macquarie now 27 years. And when I started at Macquarie, we actually had to write out journals. We didn't even have our own computer. And so I think what I have seen through automation over those many years is that automation doesn't necessarily take our jobs away. It just makes our job easier and allows actually the world to create more complexity that we then have to deal with. And without the automation, you almost can't create the complexity or the new products that actually that automation then allows. And so as far as I'm concerned, all the automation and the digitisation that we're doing at our organisation is freeing up our teams to really think about how they either improve what they do, they improve the analytics that they do, or they actually work closer with the business to achieve business outcomes and really think about the commercial aspects as opposed to the finance process accounting type aspects. And I think as well, accountants have always been fairly good at process and process redesign, and I think all the new digitisation just continues to need that experience and that process mindset, but it absolutely requires a change mindset as well. And it is really important that the leaders are encouraging that change mindset and that we're developing our people to constantly be challenging the way they do things so that they're constantly thinking about how they can make it better and aren't scared of letting things go and changing, not thinking about their jobs, but actually thinking about how it creates a better role and a better work life for them as well. That's probably the key things that I'd probably talk to, Sam, unless you have any questions you want to ask.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for that. That was really insightful. We will jump to Q&A in a moment, but I suppose the reflections that I just had on what you just talked us through was, you know, you mentioned very early on that you took, you also ran an academy, and you made sure you took real practical problems, so that this wasn't being done in theory, this was being done in practice, and that for me is really important because it brings it to life. Yeah. And the second one was, you know, you mentioned that standardization of process and appropriate governance is also critical, and I think many organizations will probably feel that can be something that, without understanding what is happening, you might feel that that's running away from you. And so we maybe come on to that in more detail in the Q&A. But yeah, look, thank you very much for that overview. And it sounds like you've had a very rich and engaging career so far at Macquarie, and I'll be interested to hear what's next once you've successfully implemented Fusion. So just before we jump into the Q&A, we're going to try something which is going to test my digital fitness, and hopefully Vishy is going to move me up the leaderboard at the end of this. So we're going to try a live poll, which hopefully in the next few seconds will be popping up as if by magic on your screen. So the question will be, you know, where do you see your organisation on the digital journey? Are you still starting out? Are you somewhere in the progressing phase, or would you say you're towards the mature end of the spectrum? Now, this is anonymous. We're doing it just to help with the conversation. So be as honest as possible, and hopefully it will take you no more than a few seconds to respond. And while that's happening, I suppose I'll just reflect on, the journey that we've gone on in PwC. As Vishy mentioned, it's been at first it was sowing the seeds of inquisitiveness and harnessing the energy of the teams, but also all of us in PwC Australia have obviously been part of the various lockdown measures, and especially here in Victoria, when we get back into the office in January and February, I'll be really interested to see how much further up the digital curve we've all got. and the new demands that we're placing on Vishy and his team to meet the needs of our community that we pull together. So hot off the press, I think we've had some good response, and about a third of you, I think you're in the early stages of the digitisation journey. 2/3 of you are progressing, and nobody has yet put their hand up to say they're at the mature end of the scale, which I suppose just helps indicate that the way that digital tools develop and techniques emerge, we never really get to the finish line on this. As soon as you feel you're getting closer to the end, something else is developed and the end pushes up further, which is what makes this such an interesting and evolving topic for us all to consider. So now that poll's closed, we'll move on quickly to the Q&A. So hopefully you've been thinking about some questions and you've been popping them into the website. I can see them coming through, and we might start with one for Vishy, actually, just picking up on something that Lisa mentioned around governance and the series of controls that you do need around these tools. Now, obviously at PwC, we're focused on supporting clients improve their governance frameworks, but keen to explore, Vishy, how you've managed that in our context.
Yep. Thank you, Sam, and thanks for that, Lisa. That was really enlightening to hear the journey that Macquarie has gone through, and lots of similarities and from a challenge as well as opportunity standpoint. So for us with the Digital Lab, one of the things that we have an organization behind the Digital Lab. It's the governance and curation team. And what they do is they firstly assess every idea that comes in to check whether an existing implementation already is in the lab. So that prevents duplication. So we don't have 6 automations working on the same thing. And if it's not exactly the same, we refer the originator of the idea to the existing asset to say, can you download that and actually expand on that and upload it back into the lab again? And so it follows a fairly stringent governance and curation process. We also have teams from our risk, from our legal, from our data privacy, from our security and technology teams quarterbacking this governance process. So I 100% agree with Lisa that if we don't leave this, if we don't govern this, it can very quickly become a whole bunch of tools that are running around in people's desktops, and we need to make sure we control that. The second part of that for me then, as part of governance, is also we audit every single asset every 6 months, and if it's not live, or if it's not relevant, or if there's a regulation that's changed, it has to be updated. So there's an audit process that's included as part of the Digital Lab. And the third is, I again agree with the point on end-to-end digitization. So we have this concept called a delivery map, which is a series of process steps. You might have an Alteryx workflow, you might have a UiPath bot that goes and retrieves data, and a Power BI visualization. We tie that together into a delivery map, which also then allows us to do more of an end-to-end automation and not just point automation. So that's how we've been going about it, but I 100% agree with the point that was made earlier.
Thank you, Vishy. And Lisa, one of the topics you mentioned was the ERP, and so that's raised a few questions. And so, in implementing the new ERP, what was a key decision that you made, or that the team made, that in hindsight was really critical in maintaining scalability and flexibility?
Yeah. There was a couple of things. A lot of people that we spoke to about their ERP implementation said, don't make it too big. Don't put everything into the ERP implementation, because once you get to 5 or 6 years, as soon as you get a delay, it just becomes too long and the organisation moves along too quickly. And so as part of that, there are a couple of key things that we didn't do. We literally decided to put the general ledger in, try not to change upstream and downstream so that we were keeping a stable environment around. And we also decided not to change our chart of accounts at the time prior to doing our ERP. We were lucky because we only had one general ledger. A lot of organisations have to change their chart of accounts as they put an ERP in because they're merging systems. Fortunately, we did only have one, and so we didn't have that. But the way we used our chart field, we decided again to keep that the same as it was today. And that has certainly removed complexity that we would have discovered as we went through. And so we're really only dealing with the complexity of the ERP going in, not everything around it having to change as well. That's probably one of the key decisions. I think as well, apart from the accounts receivable module and an allocation module, again, we haven't decided at the same time to do a whole lot of additional transformation. It's really been just about getting the general ledger in. We've now got our book of work that we're seeing that will come in afterwards. And again, that has meant that we're not caught up in trying to solve too many things all at once. I think they're probably the critical things, I would say.
I think thank you for that. That's wise advice. Don't bite off more than you can chew, I think.
Yeah, it's certainly very glad we decided not to now.
Yeah. And just following on from that, I suppose, Lisa, in your role previously as head of finance and today, how would you say that over the last couple of years, the role that finance functions play in business partnering, how would you say that's changed given the new tools and techniques that are available?
Yeah. I think what's happening that I've seen, and we might not be the same in other organisations, that in the past, the Macquarie finance functions were very much at the end of the process, and the business didn't really understand necessarily what we did, how we used the data they gave us, and the complexity that we had to deal with. That has really changed over the last 3 years. What we have all realised as we've tried to approach digitisation and automation is that we have to do it together. We have to get data accurate at source, and the business and the finance and the technology functions absolutely have to work together to design that end-to-end flow framework so that it moves seamlessly through the organisation, so that then the finance function really is left to advise, govern, analyse, not to wrangle the information out at the end into returns, regulatory submissions, all those sorts of things. We're certainly not there, but I think the recognition is absolutely there now that that journey has to be together, and that the finance teams are fundamental to creating that environment to really make that work.
Thank you. And just following on from that, is a fascinating conversation. What do you see as the skills gaps that the gap in the skills that your teams have today that are most in being closed? We'll go both Lisa and then keen for Vishy's thoughts as well.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to think that our teams are constantly developing, and certainly their knowledge of things like Power BI and Alteryx, all those tools, has definitely developed over the last few years. I think now the gap is really understanding the end-to-end in some ways. Like, how do we really think about the business outcomes, the technology that does exist? And I think it's really important that in the past when we worked with technology, we just might have told them what we wanted them to do for us, not actually investigated how we could solve a problem together. And so I think that skill to actually approach a problem with people without actually knowing the answer, but using your different skills to actually come up with the best way of solving it is actually a skill that is still being developed. I think there'll be some people that are naturally better at it than others, but I think the challenge is really to show people how that can work and not be scared by it, and that they don't have to have the answer as they go into something, and that actually the best way is to truly start with a blank piece of paper in some ways and design it with the right people to get the best outcome. I think our digitisation skills, obviously some people, as you said, will always be ahead of the others, but hopefully by people being ahead, they then bring the others behind them. And so it really is making sure that as many people as possible have a change and learning mindset, and the organisation has that change and learning mindset and is actually capable of failing and learning, obviously in a managed way, but allowing people to do that so that they can actually, in some ways, take risks to learn as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And similar question for Vishy. So Vishy, when we all get back to the office, what's next in our digitisation journey?
Yeah, thanks. I'll probably answer from the other perspective of what Lisa did. As a person driving the technology team, sometimes technology teams are fearful of letting go and want to do it all themselves and actually not help the businesses do it. So one of the key things that I've had to do within PwC is to work with my team to say, it's okay to let go. Like, let's just put the right guardrails and the security and the training, but actually focus on more of the value-adding work rather than just taking tickets and delivering that work. So that's one thing. The second for me is then looking at this continuum of automation, and everyone wants AI. Without a good data strategy, AI is just a pipe dream. So how do you start focusing on getting the essentials of data, moving into natural language processing, machine learning, and doing up all that in the context of security, data privacy, etc. So that's where our next evolution is, Sam, is how do we continue on this? As I said, not quite done on the current one yet, but how do we take that and have this process of continued learning? And you said something earlier, which is transformation is not a program, digital transformation. It's a way of how organizations need to operate. And it's really embedding that into our culture and DNA is our next challenge.
Thank you. Thank you. One more for Lisa, if I may. Something that I'm particularly interested in is, in your mind, where does the finance function sit in terms of the broader Macquarie digitisation journey? So would you consider finance to be a leader in this field, a laggard, or somewhere in between?
I think it's a mixture, actually. I think we have probably our retail bank is probably the furthest ahead into digitisation across the whole group. They put a new core banking platform in ahead of us. And so I think they're further ahead on their journey. I think we probably are then next with maybe our commodities and trading businesses. And then some of our other businesses, I think, are probably behind where we are. And I think that we're now helping them by dragging them along in some ways. Some of those businesses, that accounts receivable module that I talked about, they didn't have one before. They don't have a huge volume of invoicing, but actually it's a platform now that they can use, and they're coming onto that, and it's making a big difference to them because it does give them a platform that they can use. So I think we're not at the forefront of everyone, but we're certainly not far behind the furthest, and then I would like to think well ahead of some of the others.
Thank you. And there's nothing like a bit of healthy competition between different functions to drive the organisation forward. One more for you, Lisa, if I may, that raised quite a few questions is around, you mentioned governance and sort of managing the transformation journey. Can you elaborate on 2 or 3 significant changes to the governance structure or things you put in place to make sure that was well managed?
Yeah. So there's a few things. We have established quite big now, a data team over the last few years, and it has different aspects to it. One part is obviously just managing data, but there's another one that basically is our enterprise data management, which establishes the controls around data that we should have. That's obviously part of a bigger organisational data control room. But then we also have within that data team a part of it which actually governs how we actually run our automations. And so they actually make sure that people have gone through the right process of developing. When people are developing things like Alteryx or Power BI, they actually do it in a specific technical space, which I think we call the collaboration area. But then they have to have it signed off before it's put into production. And then it's continued to be monitored and maintained in production by a team who actually monitors and manages those and work closely with the business teams that are actually using them. And I think certainly as we've, say, for example, been interacting with that team as part of the GL implementation, it's been really useful because they run those automations. They've made sure that the GL feeds that need to go into them have been changed and adapted that as need be to go into them. If that was much more spread around the group, that might have been a much trickier and less controlled sort of piece of work, and much harder than it has ended up being because that team does run those automations. So it's certainly worth doing. And one thing we've really seen as we've attacked the general ledger. It's been there since 2003. So lots of things built up in the general ledger, especially in on-premise, that I'm sure everyone appreciates. As we've peeled it apart, what we realised is there were bits there that really weren't really being monitored and maintained in the way they should be. They were things that were running within the general ledger. We will make sure similar with our new general ledger, just like those other automations that sit outside it, that there's an owner for each piece of calculation or a model that sits within there, or an allocation, that it is maintained, signed off every 6 months, and there's an owner of it who makes sure that it stays appropriate. So it's something that I'm probably seeing consistently over technology, is that maybe we all just assume that technology always gets it right, but how do we really make sure that as we set up all these digitisations, that we're really maintaining, monitoring them, and having owners that truly do make sure that they're actually producing the right outcome still for us as the organisation changes. I think that's something that's really important.
Thank you. Wise advice there. So we might bring the session to a close with one more question, the same question for both of you. So if you had your time again on the digitisation journey, what were the couple of things that you would do differently or that you would double down on? So maybe Lisa, we'll go to you first, and then close with Vishy.
I think I would create more space for teams to have more time to actually do this. There's only so much that teams can do when they're also running their BAU. And so the more time and capacity we can give them to do this, and maybe even it's sometimes taking SMEs out of their role to actually get it done quicker, and then creating more of that end-to-end view as opposed to the piece of a puzzle that each individual might be looking for, to really get a more holistic view of the automation as you approach it and think about it. And probably earlier on, getting that business, finance and tech resource all working together, and to redesign that new flow.
Thanks, Sam, and I agree with everything that Lisa said. The only other two things I would add from a PwC standpoint is I would have actually liked to have started our digital academy to be a virtual offering. COVID fast-tracked that, but really there was no other reason for us not to offer it as a virtual academy and get more breadth and spread earlier. So that's something I guess has really helped us fast-track and lessons learned. The other thing I would say is in the current environment, it allows us to be a lot more collaborative with clients. So I've had a lot of clients approach us to say, can we have a hybrid program with digital accelerators or academies? And again, that's something we haven't contemplated in the past, but now it makes it absolutely possible. So bringing the clients into the digital transformation ecosystem earlier, and also pivoting to more of a digital offering are the two things we could have done better sooner, but we're on to that now. And the last thing I said is continuing to evaluate the tools that are in the market, because as Lisa said, the technology is one part, but you also want to make sure that you're not investing in technology that's too edgy and too out there. You want to make sure you get the right balance, and we're certainly doing that now. So those are some of our lessons learned, not to mention the cultural journey that doesn't stop. We need to continue pushing that. And the people focus, because ultimately this is a digital session about finance, but to me it's really about people, and that's something that we want to continue to focus on.
Thank you, Vishy. Thank you for that. And thank you, Lisa. Both of you, I thought, provided some really insightful and inspiring messages there. So thank you. So that brings the formal session to a close. I suppose a few perspectives from me. For those of you that know me, you know that I'm not at the leading edge of new technology and new digital tools, but it's been pleasing to hear that all of us can make a positive contribution to this, that it really is most important. It's the change management journey that we're all going through, that all levels of leadership and all levels of the organisation are brought on board, and that stakeholders are appropriately managed along the way so that the organisation gets the most out of this significant investment. And secondly, that both Vishy and Lisa mentioned time and time again that the energy and the passion that comes from our teams is what drives this forward. So what better way to engage and retain key talent in the profession than getting on board with this exciting journey. And I suppose thirdly, given my roots are fairly and squarely within audit, pleasing to hear that a strong focus on risk and controls and governance was heard loud and clear, because at the end of the day, this thing all needs to work, and organisations need to be in a better place at the end of the journey than they were at the beginning. So I'd like to formally thank Vishy and Lisa for their time, also Andrew Porter for his kind words at the beginning, and although not participating today, the members of the working group that are working alongside PwC as part of this G100 PwC webinar series. So hopefully you've all enjoyed it. At the end of this webcast, you'll receive an update email with some details of the digital fitness app and a brief survey to provide your feedback on, please. And in the new year, we will be hosting a series of these events, probably early March through to June, and then probably again in September. So as I mentioned earlier, any and all suggestions are welcome around topics or areas of interest or things we could be doing differently to make this a more impactful and interactive session for you all. So with that, I might wrap up now, and thank you all again for joining, and hopefully you've got a few minutes left of lunch to enjoy. Thank you.